Nano Machine by Hanjo Leolia. Chapter 408. Great Hun Clan of the Great Plains. Part 1. The north belongs to the Jianghu. It meant the border of Shaanxi, Gansu, Shaanxi, and Hebei. To reach Lake Baikal, where the North Sea Ice Palace, which held power over the outer north, is located, you would have to pass through the Great Plains that were ruled by several barbarian tribes. Clip-clop. Clip-clop. In the border area between Shaanxi and the Great Plains, the sound of horses running echoed everywhere. More than 400 or so elite Ulen clan warriors were moving to the north in a line. As previously announced by Kong Soa, the unit commander, the situation was urgent, so after a non-stop trip, they reached this place in just 3 days. Of course, to get to Shaanxi at that speed, they had to stop by other clans under Ulen, which were on the way, and change horses. Clip-clop. Clip-clop. Throughout the ride, the commander, Kong Soa, was silent and concerned. There was a reason for his concern. It was because he heard unexpected news on his way to the north. Are you saying that your people have asked for help from the demonic cult? Yes. Well, it wasn't a formal request, only one member of the army was sent to them, but since it wasn't an official request from the main palace, the demonic cult might not dispatch any troops. Dan Zhizong told the truth just to be careful. Of course, he knew that the demonic cult wouldn't come to help, but they were in an emergency, so he decided to disclose this information just in case. Kong Soa thought that only the Ulen were only being asked for help because of their agreement, but the mention of the demonic cult made Kong Soa feel troubled. This is totally unexpected. Well, it wasn't a formal request, so they won't care. Except during wars of conquest, leaders usually ignore other requests. Moyong Kong of the Moyong family heard that and responded that the demonic cult would in no way help the north. Even Jihul Sohi half agreed. Leader Moyong's words have some truth. Currently, the demonic cult is in a situation where they need to lay the groundwork for their new academy. In the meantime, if they were to distribute their men, they'd lose time and money. But that is a correct answer from a military point of view, but I can't guarantee that Lord Chen Yuan will do that. Jigul Sohi had gone as an envoy to the demonic cult, and she met with Chen Yuan when he was still the crown prince. And as a result of closely observing Chen Yuan's progress as a lord, she realized that he wasn't the type of person to move according to textbook strategies. Therefore, she wasn't sure about the demonic cult's movements. Kong Soa. After all, we and the demonic cult are in alliance. Would it be so concerning just because they send a couple of men to the North Sea Ice Palace? I wonder how we would distribute the dragon's blood and core after it's killed. Core? Kong Soa was more concerned about what would happen after the dragon turtle is killed. Jigul Sohi was just as concerned as Dan Zhizong, the envoy from North Sea Ice Palace, but didn't speak about it. Leader Kong, I hope you take ownership of the core at that. Even though Yan Buso's right arm got cut off by the lord of the demonic cult, his fiancée seems to have a soft heart towards the cult, seeing how you are talking about the alliance. Have you fallen for evil? What did you say? I have nothing to say to you. Jigul Sohi felt strongly insulted and tried to yell, but Kong Soa ignored her and accelerated the march. Ugh. Jigul Sohi suppressed her anger. Wouldn't she hate Chen Yuan, who cut off her fiancé's arm? However, as a soldier in charge of the military strategy of the entire Ulen, she endured because she knew that there was nothing more foolish than involving personal matters in work. Is he still worried about the demonic cult dispatching troops? With each passing day, the silence from Kong Soa grew. Looking at his face, he seemed to be worried about the strategy. Ah. We are entering the Great Plains. As she was riding her horse, she saw the northern plains. She had no intention of talking to him either, but she shouted at Kong Soa because he led the group. We will arrive at the Great Plains. Leader Kong. The realm of barbarians. At those words, Moyang Kang's face tensed. Unlike the Jigul clan and Huangbo clans, which were located inside the Jianhu, the people of Moyang had settled in Liaoning, which was in the north, and they were well aware of the barbarians. Although they weren't martial artists, they were still capable of fighting wars throughout the 4 seasons. Of course, it wasn't one-on-one, so he wasn't afraid, but it would have been difficult if the barbarians wanted war and brought in their men. I am glad that Kong Soa has been made the commander. Moyang Kong looked at Kong Soa, who was driving the march ahead. He heard that Kong Soa and the Black Shadow Group had been fighting the barbarians in the north of Shaanxi for 5 straight years. Therefore, even Emok and other leaders agreed to him leading the troops. Was it recently that he signed an agreement with them? He heard that 2 years ago, Kong Soa made an agreement with Asura, the war chief of Great Hun clan, who was greatly known among the barbarians of the Great Plains. There were several treasure chests next to the goods in the wagons, behind the march, which must have been prepared if they ran into each other. I hope nothing goes wrong. It would be disastrous if the Dragon Turtle mission doesn't go as planned, yet, there was a reason why only one envoy was sent from the North Sea Ice Palace, and that was to avoid friction with the barbarians. Although not large, the barbarians were going to encounter 400 armed men willing to cross the Great Plains. Nothing had happened during the half-day trip. And it was late afternoon. Do. Ah. The advancing procession of Ulen forces stopped at once. The commander's orders weren't given, but they all stopped and looked somewhere. A vast force seemed to fill the horizon in the sunset. Thousands of horse hooves were making the earth below tremble as if there was an earthquake. Will we end up meeting them on the first day? Moyang Kong shook his head. The barbarians sat quietly on the saddles as the horses moved. They were all covered in fur coats and had weapons on them. Grayish-brown wolf fur, they are the Great Hun clan. Dan Zhizong, the envoy from North Sea Ice Palace, who was next to Kong, spoke. Poo! The sound of horns from the army could be heard. Tension rose on the faces of the Ulen warriors, who had to advance. It was then that Kong Soa sent a hand signal to raise the flag. Raise the flag. Yes. The warriors in the front row raised white flags at the cry of the lieutenant of the Blade Shadow Group. When the Blade Shadow flag was raised, dozens of horses at the forefront fell apart and came towards them. Ah! Their chief? Although Ulen had so many troops, they only came with a small number of men showing their courage. Among the dozens of horses, there was one which particularly stood out, a man wearing red fur, so big that even the horse he was riding on seemed covered. The man knew no martial arts, yet, it was evident how strong and brave he was. Asura. Moyang Kang's and Dan Zhizong's eyes widened at the name, which came out of Kong Soa's mouth. Asura was the name of the war chief of the Great Hun clan. Everyone had heard of his name and fame, but had never actually seen his face. I don't get it. That big guy is the war chief of the Great Hun clan? Looking at the colossal mace that he was holding, he seemed like someone with great power. As the man called Asura arrived, Kong Soa politely greeted him. It has been long. Shockingly, the words which Kong Soa was speaking were in the language of the barbarians. Everyone, who was leading the troops along with him, was surprised. They knew that he was dealing with the barbarians for 5 years, but it was shocking to see how fluent his words were. Clap. The war chief of the clan, called Asura, reached out to him. The Kong Soa, as if used to it, grabbed it, and both tapped their chest. Pack. Pack. Finishing it, Asura showed off his yellow teeth and smiled broadly. Ah. So this is their greeting. Seeing the broad smile, there seemed to be no hostile feelings. As Kong Soa raised his hand, the warriors of the Black Shadow, who were behind them, went to the carriage and brought out 10 colorful boxes. Thud. When the boxes were opened, it was filled with numerous objects and gold ingots. Seeing that, Asura, the war chief of the great Hun clan, nodded with satisfaction and said, "I like it." It was prepared in a hurry, but it looked like Asura liked it. Kong Soa explained in advance that they would have to cross the land to go to the North Sea. Asura was glad that there was no damage to the clan and that they were being given a tribute. "I think that the talks went well." At the quiet words of Dan Juzong, Jigal Sohi asked, "Can you understand them? Since the North Sea and Great Plains are close to each other, I know the difference between a conflict and an exchange. Most of the people in North Sea Ice Palace can speak that language." According to Dan Juzong's words, it seemed that they were permitted to move to North Sea Ice Palace without any problems. However, the conversation was taking longer than expected. Asura's voice rose slightly. "What is it?" Jigal Sohi felt like something was off about Asura's reaction. Kong Soa spoke with many hand gestures as if asking for something, but Asura and the man next to him, who looked like his lieutenant, were arguing about something. Huh. However, even Dan Juzong, who heard their conversation, seemed troubled. "Envoy Dan. If it is okay with you, can you tell me what they are talking about?" Dan Juzong spoke back in a flustered tone. I don't know that well, ? Leader Kong is asking the Great Hun clan to take care of those who try to cross the Great Plains other than the Ulen and to prevent them from passing. Huh? Sohi's expression hardened. After the Ulen finished the exchange, they headed north. After they left, Sorachu, the left arm of Asura and the second strongest man in the clan, spoke. "Chief. Are you really going to accept Kong Soa's offer? Why are you so concerned about that? It's shocking that he even asked something like that." Asura asked Sorachu, who was a brave warrior who fought countless wars alongside him. Sorachu shook his head and said, "The Wulin is dangerous, but haven't you heard the news from Bukoi, who recently visited the Jianghu?" Bukoi is one of War Chief Asura's escort warriors. Although the barbarians were thought to be completely cut off from the Jianghu, they would send people to Jianghu to collect information and sometimes exchange information too. Bukoi. At Asura's call, from the horses waiting behind, a man with a large scar on his face answered. "Yes. War Chief. Did you say that the ones fighting for supremacy in the Jianghu are the demonic cult and the Blade God 6 martial clan?" "Yes. Among them, I heard that the one named Chen Yuan, the lord of demonic cult, is a monster and is being called the demon god." Demon god, Chen Yuan, his actions were heard through the people of Jianghu. A power that was beyond human ability. The rumors were that he floated up in the sky and brought down a lightning bolt in the castle. No one could believe it when they heard it. Demon god, that is one crazy name indeed. But how dare they call a human a god? Surprisingly, they knew about the news in Jianghu. The reason was martial arts. Asura's escort warrior, the one called Bukoi, was a warrior who mastered martial arts. Every time they went to the south for war, the war chief of the Great Hun clan, who had conflicts with the Wulin people, in addition to the imperial army, got interested in martial arts. This was why he sent people to Jianghu and invested 3 generations worth of time just to create an invincible army made of warriors who mastered martial arts. And with that, the Great Hun clan was able to claim hegemony of the Great Plains. By the way, didn't he say that the dangerous thing was that demon god? Even before Kong Soa made an offer and tried to advise Asura to stop the demonic cult from proceeding, the war chief had no intention of letting the demon god pass. But Kong Soa kept on persuading him, not knowing that. "You don't have to worry about the demonic cult. The great leader of the forces of justice would never come here for such a task. Do you really think that the lord of demonic cult, who holds such power, will appear here, in person?" Kong Soa kept saying that the Lord of Demonic Cult would never cross the land. However, if members of the cult come, Asura accepted the proposal of helping the Ulen clan. I know, but don't worry. We won't have any direct encounters with them. At that, Soracha looked puzzled as he asked, "Do you have anything in mind?" Hoo, didn't they ask us to not let anyone other than the people of Ulen go through? That is true. The courageous warriors of the Great Hun clan are standing here. Even if they are martial artists, will they try to fight us in our land? Thousands of troops. It was not something that could be taken lightly. Didn't the Ulen troops, which just passed them, become anxious because of that number? Just by shooting arrows, the barbarians could cover the sky in black. Are you going to push them into fear? Yes, a moderate threat. Only if we bump into them, even if he is called the demon god, would he come all the way here to the Great Plains just to fight us? That was the real plan of War Chief Asura. Soracha spoke with a wide smile after hearing the war chief's words. That is amazing. If we do as you said, we will get 3,000 sheep without even taking any damage to our tribe. In exchange for granting Kong Soa's request, he promised to give the Great Hun clan 3,000 sheep. Gold and silver were good, but sheep held real value to the nomadic barbarians of the Great Plains. Ha 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 ha. Isn't this called one stone for two birds superscript 1? While laughing loudly, they saw that a messenger with yellow feather fur was approaching them. Without even properly getting down the horse, the messenger bowed his head and reported, "War Chief. Right now, about 20 miles to the southwest, an armed force of about 600 men are moving to the north. People from other tribes? No. Judging from their attire, they seem to be from the Jianghu." Hearing that, the war chief Asura and his men's eyes gleamed. Those people were coming sooner than expected. The sun had set, and darkness began to come. About 600 men, with torches lit, marched towards the north in 5 rows. They were the demonic cult, who had the word demon written proudly on their flags. Seeing how they were advancing, it looked like they were all high in morale. Instead of dispatched troops, it looked like they were out on campaign. Those who dignifiedly rode horses at the head of each group of 100 warriors were the 6 swords. They were full of determination as this was their first proper mission. Despite their journey to the north and not resting for the past 3 days, their eyes were more than alive. At that time, the demonic cult troops, which were moving north, came to a halt. What is that? What's going on? The reason they stopped was simple. Do-do-do-do-dad. The sound of horse hooves rumbled the ground. Countless torches filled the night sky horizon from the north, where they were supposed to be heading, and the torches were only coming closer. At first glance, it looked like a large army of 10,000 people. They were the armies of the Great Hun clan, the hegemon of the northern plains. A smile spread across the lips of War Chief Asura, his left arm Sorachu and the other leaders of the tribe, who were moving at the forefront of the Great Hun clan. They came right in the same day, saved us a lot of trouble. Ha ha ha. Unfortunate. Those Ulen men had gone through before them. If only they came ahead, the cult would have passed by after giving us a tribute. Haha, those bastards need to be sent back to their place. Bukoi. Yes. War Chief. At the call of War Chief Asura, the escort Bukoi stepped ahead. And he was ordered to let them know that they can't get through and tell them to go back to their land. If they don't go back, tell them that they will lose their lives under the swords of the Great Hun clan. Yes, War Chief. He was one of the few warriors in the barbarians who could speak the language of Jianghu. Bukoi, who received the order, rode forward and shouted at the 600 troops of the demonic cult who were visible. Listen to me. The voice of Bukoi, which held power, resounded in the Great Plains. As if to give it momentum, the warriors of the Great Hun clan slammed the ground with their spears and shouted. Thud. 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 Waha. Their army shouted, and the roar spread all over the place. Bukoy, who thought that he had sufficiently lowered the enemy's morale, delivered the words of war chief. Men from the Jianghu. We are the Great Hun clan, the great warriors who rule the Great Plains. I am a warrior, Bukoy, who is directly under the great chief, our war. Chief Asura. Woaha. After introducing himself, Bukoy went straight to the main topic. This land is ours. This isn't the place where foreigners can wander. Go back to where you live right away. This is the only warning that you'll be given. If you don't go back, you will be killed by the swords and spears of our great warriors. Wah! Even though the barbarians didn't understand what Bukoy was saying, they still shouted and helped in relay their power. The shouts were so loud that their eardrums were pounding. It was the moment when Bukoy, convinced that he had managed to scare them, turned back his horse and looked at the war chief with a satisfied expression. Listen, Great Hun clan. The very moment Bukoy turned, he had to look back at the cult as the voice resounded strongly in the open land. It wasn't the voice that shocked him. It was because the one who spoke up was speaking their language. Whoa! Even the warriors of the Great Hun clan heard it. There was no way that they couldn't have heard that. Did those people learn to speak our tongue? The pronunciation was a lot clearer than they expected. Then followed the voice again. I am Chen Yuan, the Lord of Sky Demon Order. Bukoy, Asura, and even Sorochu were shocked at the accurate wording and precise voice, which could fool anyone into thinking he was a native speaker. The name which was introduced was something they heard just an hour ago. There was no way they could forget the name. Chen Yuan? No, no way, demon god? At Sorochu's muttering, War Chief Asura pointed his mace at the troops of the demonic cult and shouted with a bewildered expression. What kind of bullshit is this? We were told that he wouldn't be here. Chapter 409. Great Hun Clan of the Great Plains. Part 2. An innumerable number of torches were in view of the demonic cult's contingents. There was a large army that seemed to be made up of thousands, no tens of thousands of people. Even the 6 swords looked nervous as they watched the vast army gradually approach them. Although their lord Chen Yuan is called the demon god, it would be their first time facing such a large amount of warriors. No way, how is this possible? On the right side of Chen Yuan, Baekhyun, who was riding his horse, became scared. He didn't know that there were such a massive number of barbarians in the Great Plains. Before heading north from the demonic cult's branch, he recommended that Chen Yuan prepare a tribute to avoid any fights with the barbarians. Except in rare cases, most barbarian tribes would receive the tribute and let people pass. This is the first time this has happened. No barbarian would lead an army of that size just to drive away intruders. Although the number of the demonic cult's contingents wasn't small, the barbarians seemed fearless, as if they didn't know what martial arts were. Hubon shook his head as he sighed. It wasn't like they hadn't thought that such a situation would crop up on their journey to the North Sea Ice Palace. However, they couldn't blame anyone when the situation turned sour. This land is ours. This isn't the place where you foreigners can wander. Go back to where you come from right away. This is the only warning that you'll be given. If you don't go back, you will be killed by the swords and spears of our great warriors. Wah! The shouts of the warriors of the Great Hun clan resounded. The high morale of their warriors scared the demonic cult, who had to advance quickly. The Great Hun clan is the hegemon of the Great Plains. They are dangerous. Baekhyun warned Yuan with a serious expression. The great guardian, Mara Kim, who was riding the horse left to Chen Yuan, spoke in a low voice. Too many, Lord. There were definitely too many enemies for them to fight. Moreover, there seemed to be a few who mastered martial arts within the barbarians. As the army belonged to the Great Hun clan, they couldn't just dismiss the matter. At that time, someone not as huge as Ko Wonger, but middle-aged with a large body wearing blue armor spoke. Lord. The Great Guardian speaks facts. To defeat them, we need to be ready to make significant sacrifices. The opponents weren't 10 times greater in number. Their numbers were 100 times greater. The middle-aged man who gave Yowen the advice was the 6th elder, Mong Mu. As the demonic cult was being expanded, Yowen brought in warriors from the main base of the demonic cult. It would be a waste of energy. Chen Yowen had the same opinion as them. If they went into a battle, it would be a loss for the demonic cult in many ways. In that case, negotiating would be effective. If that didn't work, he could resort to intimidation in moderation. Nano. Can you analyze their language? Chen Yowen asked, pointing to the warriors of the Great Hun clan who were screaming from afar. And it didn't take long for an answer. It's close to Russian, the language of the East Slavic family. Interpretation is available. Can you relay that to me? Available. Transferring Russian into the user's brain. Approve? Yes. Train. As the word yes fell, his head stung from all the information of the Russian language flooding into his brain. Their language, which he couldn't understand until recently, seemed clear as day. Go away. Strangers. If you don't go back, I'll stick this spear into you and turn you into a kebab. Ha ha ha. There was a lot of swearing since they assumed that the demonic cult couldn't understand their language. It seemed like they were dead set on not letting the demonic cult pass. Chen Yowen moved a little closer on his horse. Lord? Why? While his subordinates were puzzled, Chen Yowen shouted to the army of the Great Hun clan. Listen, Great Hun clan. A completely different language came out of Chen Yowen's mouth, which shocked all the cult warriors. How is he speaking their language? Baekhyun was the one who was shocked the most. He was about to interpret for Chen Yowen because negotiation needed to be done, but hearing Chen Yowen speak the language of barbarians, he was shocked. While Chen Yowen continued. I am Chen Yowen, the Lord of the Sky Demon Order. This man clearly knew the language of barbarians. Even the Great Hun clan, which was screaming, began to mumble. Whoa. Once he said that, Chen Yowen began to negotiate. I am well aware that this is the land of the Great Hun clan. Therefore, in respect of the tribe, a tribute has been prepared to pass through your land. We didn't come here to wage war against the Great Hun clan, we want to avoid any friction for the sake of the people on both sides. At the attempt to negotiate, the faces of Sorochu, the war chief Asura, and even the other warriors in front of the tribe turned stiff. Until a moment back, the Great Hun clan tried to threaten the demonic cult and send them back. However, this was completely unexpected. Demon God? Kong Soa seems to have deceived us. Asura spoke in disgusted expression. If what the Lord of Demonic Cult said was true, then Kong Soa had given them false information. Okuro, one of the commanders of the tribe, the war commander, spoke to Asura. War chief, they may be lying. Yes. The other commanders agreed too. Among the 3 major powers of Jianghu, the demonic cult is said to control the Yellow River, so for what reason could they be coming to the Great Plains? As Kong Soa said, the great leader of the forces of justice didn't even move with their troops. However, Sorochu objected to their words. War chief. You need to be careful. We have no idea about them. However, since he himself revealed his identity, it might not be a lie. Sorochu was right. They were the only tribe of barbarians who knew information about the demonic cult. All because they were interested in martial arts, they constantly sent people to Jianghu to get information. However, the other tribes were unaware of martial arts. But he knows the language. Besides, he seems skillful in it. Maybe it isn't the lord of demonic cult, but other tribesmen joining in to help them. Almost every commander had a different opinion on what was happening. But among other tribes, those who know about Jianhu. War Chief. There is nothing one can be perfectly sure about in this world. There is no way that the other tribes didn't send their people to the Jianhu to gather information. Sorochu was speechless with those words. It was certainly strange that the lord of demonic cult was speaking their language. At that, Okuro, the more warlike warrior, shouted bravely. War Chief. Why do we have to wait? Send me and my warriors. Let them know my martial arts, I will make them kneel. Seeing the strong intent in his words, Asura fell into thoughts. The demonic cult only had 600 men, which meant that the barbarians had nothing to fear. No matter how skilled their martial arts were, there was no way the Jianhu men had that much stamina. However, the absurd rumors about Demon God didn't leave his mind. War Chief. All they asked for was permission to pass through to the North Sea. This isn't a territorial war, why do we need to resort to fighting? The commanders were displeased with Sorochu's words. It felt like something a coward would say. A man who is supposed to be beside the war chief after fighting so many wars was talking like a coward. War Chief. Since when did the Great Hun clan fear any enemies? When Okuro was about to make another complaint, Bokoi rode back to them and spoke. War Chief. It looks like he is the demon god. What is that supposed to mean? Bokoi answered the question of Asura, who was puzzled. Did you hear what he said? Would there be anyone who didn't hear that? It was so clear that everyone heard. But he didn't scream. What do you mean? To allow them to hear me, I yelled, but that person spoke in a very low voice. However, it isn't unusual to speak with internal energy. Bokoi was a warrior who learned martial arts. Having learned martial arts, he too cultivated internal energy. After honing his skills for a long time, he managed to reach master level, and the voice of the one called Chen Yuan, who claimed to be the lord of demonic cult, reached a level that Bokoi couldn't even guess. Bokoi was a brave warrior. Having learned martial arts, the commanders of the tribe considered Bokoi to be an excellent warrior, and that made them puzzled by the fact that Bokoi seemed scared of the enemy before even fighting them. Honestly, that was natural. Chen Yuan knew that people mastered martial arts among the barbarians, so he purposely used internal energy. And those who knew about that would begin to fear him. Meisei. War Chief. Bokoi was the one Asura had ordered to go ahead because he knew martial arts, but there were others too. Do you have the same opinion as Bokoi? Ugh, I don't know if it is the demon god or not, but his internal energy from that voice, he must be a lot stronger than us. Meisei was also at the master level, but was even stronger than Bokoi. When he expressed the same opinion, War Chief Asura shook his head. If it was really the demon god, no matter how superior their numbers were, the damage they would take would be greater. This is so frustrating. War Chief. How great are the martial arts that we need to be afraid of them? Do you need to believe all the words that warrior Bokoi has said? Okuro complained. He too had witnessed numerous battles in his life, but he didn't think that they would lose to an army they never fought. Are you going to back down just because you are afraid of 600 strangers? All the other tribes will laugh at us. And do you really believe that false rumor of him flying and striking down lightning? At Okuro's provocative words, War Chief Asura's eyebrows rose. He knew that Okuro was purposely hurting his pride. Rumors are often exaggerated. Even more so if it is about those people. Give me 3,000 warriors. I will wipe them all out. I think the same as Commander Okuro. It is unacceptable for the Great Hun clan to be swept away by those rumors. One by one, the young ones too began to agree with Okuro's words. They didn't believe Bokoi, who had been to Jianghu. Those who had been dissatisfied with the fact that the tribe had always let travelers through if they prepared a tribute, used this as an opportunity. These bums. Were they all upset? War Chief Asarai lit up. Not many warriors of the Great Hun clan believed in martial arts. It was only natural that people began to feel displeased. Then, a good war appeared. Sorachu. Are there any troops in the rear from the Yada tribe? Yes, there are. The Yada tribe was the last tribe the Great Hun clan had defeated in a territorial war. The victorious tribes would take in the losers, and they recruited 2,000 young warriors as loot. It was less than a fortnight ago, so they weren't well integrated into the clan. Commander Okuro, I will give you 2,000 Yada warriors, and the 3rd Corps, if you are competent, go ahead and show me your bravery. War Chief. BOM. Okuro shouted as he hit his chest. I will live up to your expectations. Good. Go. Yes. Asura gave Okuro 3 young commanders, who had agreed with Okuro. Excited, Okuro rode his horse forward. At this point, he only wanted to show off his bravery to the tribe, even if he didn't depend on the unit, which learned martial arts. I will get to confirm if it really is the demon god. War Chief Asura looked at the back of the Okuro, who was gathering up his warriors and advancing. Meanwhile, Chun Yo-won and his subordinates, who were waiting for a response, stood silently. It was because they could see troops being divided and advancing towards them. It seemed to be a troop of 2,000 men. We seem to have failed in negotiations. Baekhyun spoke with a puzzled expression. Although only a portion of the soldiers were advancing, the number was too large for the demonic cults. They ended up entering the worst-case scenario that they desperately wanted to avoid. What are we supposed to do? No matter how skilled the martial arts users were when compared to ordinary people, the difference in number was too great to ignore. Baekhyun was worried about how many people would make it to the North Sea. Contrary to him, Ko Wonger, Bakgi, Samachak, and the others of the 6 swords moved ahead a little with confidence. Lord. What should we do? Although the army of the opponent was overwhelming, they weren't afraid. If Chen Yo-won gave them an order to fight, they were ready to advance. Wait for a moment. Yes. Chen Yo-won asked them to halt. Negotiations were unsuccessful, but there was still one more thing to do. Chen Yo-won slowly rode his horse forward. What will he do going in there alone? Baekhyun looked concerned, unable to understand. Dud. As the force of 2,000 began to get closer, the earth shuddered stronger. As the distance grew closer, the commander, Okuro, who was riding his horse at the forefront, raised his hand and ordered the warriors of the Yada tribe to halt. All troops. Aim. As the order fell, the advancing warriors of Yada got their bows and arrows ready. Not only the Great Hun clan, but even the barbarians of the Great Plains looked skilled. They seemed more accustomed to horseback warfare. Even on the moving horses, their bows were stiff. Demon god? Who would believe in such false rumors? Don't make me laugh. That's right. Commander. Huh. Let's send them back with our finest arrows. Shoot. At the cry of the young commanders, including Okuro, the warriors who were aiming let go of their arrows. The arrows, which were held back by the top bowstring, rushed towards the demonic cult's contingent all at once. Arrows fell like rain in the dark sky. Swoosh! Swoosh! Lift your spears! Wah! The Great Hun clan warriors picked up their spears to reduce their enemies down right after the arrow strike. However, something incredible happened. What? Since the night was dark, they didn't notice it right away, but the 2,000 arrows stopped midair. Dumb. Barbarians had sharper eyes than the people of Jianghu. Shocked that the arrows stopped, they stopped their advance too. They have been to many battlefields, but this was the first time they witnessed such a sight. What the hell is that? In front of them, a young man riding a horse came into view. The young man had fluttering hair and had his hand outstretched, like he was the one who halted the arrows. Just the sight of him gave off a dignified aura. Okuro muttered. Is he the demon god? He instinctively knew. Chunyoan gently waved his outstretched hand towards them. All the arrows which were aiming at the demonic cult turned around and pointed at them. Wing! The direction the arrows changed and aimed towards them. Flustered, Okuro shouted to the 2,000 warriors. D-divide! As his shout fell, the 2,000 arrows which had rotated flew towards them. Wing! Puck! Thud! The horses collided. The warriors of the Yada tribe desperately tried to spread out, after seeing the absurd sight of arrows returning to them. But Puk! 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 Quack! The arrows? Quack! Ack! Shockingly, all the arrows followed them and made sure to hit a person. As if the arrows had a sense of direction, they went right for the hearts and heads. Okuro was stunned, after looking back at what was happening, because of the screams that came in from all directions. That is ridiculous. How could this happen? The figure, who seemed like the epitome of bravery, vanished. He, who dismissed the rumors about the demon god, realized that he was wrong only when he was moments away from death. Pack! Quack! Thud! The commander, Okuro, was pierced through his forehead and fell off his horse. War Chief Asura and the other commanders, who witnessed it from afar, couldn't hold back their shocked expressions. 2,000 warriors who marched valiantly turned into corpses in an instant. With just a single gesture. It was all true. There wasn't a pinch of lies in the rumors they heard. Chapter 410. Great Hun Clan of the Great Plains. Part 3. The rumors are really true. The Prince of North Sea Ice Palace, Baekhyun, was so shocked that he couldn't shut his mouth. Chunyoan, the lord of the demonic cult, moved alone, and he wondered why no one stopped him, but seeing that, he knew how reliable that monster was. I thought that it was exaggerated. When Baekhyun went to the south to meet the lord of the demonic cult, he heard many rumors from the people of Shaanxi. It was rumored that the lord of the demonic cult flew into the sky and caused lightning to strike in Jin Castle of the Tongo region, and because of that, he was called the demon god. Most rumors are inflated, so Baekhyun thought that the lord was strong but didn't realize that he was super strong. That man is really the demon god. Other than that, there was no other name to call him. The fresh corpses of 2,000 Yada turning cold was proof of that. Wing! The scent of blood in the cold night stimulated their noses. The unbelievable sight that unfolded in front of everyone's eyes brought silence. As everyone looked at the dead warriors in amazement, they couldn't even get themselves to understand what had happened. Did you see that? The arrows came back? What the hell is that? It didn't take long for the 2,000 warriors to die. Maybe if they took 5,000 troops, it would have taken longer. The warriors felt outraged, but the chiefs felt different. How did this happen? He is a monster. What kind of skill did he use to do that? Seeing the mysterious and overwhelming power of the lord of the demonic cult, Chunyoan, right in front of their eyes, not a single person wanted to move. Chief Sorcho hurriedly spoke to War Chief Asura. War Chief. The demon god, if he is that, we shouldn't fight that person. Just let them go. To that, Asura nodded. It was fortunate that the warriors they sent were from the Yada tribe and not their own. Thud. Kong Soa, that bastard. All the resentment was directed at Kong Soa of the Ulen clan. He was the one who said that the monster, who annihilated 2,000 warriors with a single gesture, would never come to the north. Firstly, they had to avoid a fight with the demon god. War Chief Asura hurriedly ordered Bukoi. Bukoi, make this right, and relay that the war chief doesn't want any friction. The only ones who could speak the language of Jianghu were Bukoi and Meisei. However, Bukoi didn't respond to the orders. Meisei tried to do something and approached him, but Bukoi was looking somewhere with a white face. What is he doing? War Chief Asura's expression froze when he looked at where Bukoi was looking. It wasn't just him. All the commanders and chiefs were the same. They all frowned and had hardened expressions. Wen? Chunyoan was supposed to be more than half a mile away. However, he was suddenly standing in the middle of the enemy camp where Asura and his other commanders were gathered. Bukoi, the escort warrior, couldn't help but be shocked at this. He didn't even sense any movement. I missed it even though I was watching him. If this monster puts his mind to it, War Chief and the others will die at any time. As an escort warrior, he wasn't supposed to think like that, but if the monster was really determined, he knew that no one could stop him. However, that didn't mean that he was giving up his role as an escort. Protect the war chief. SRNG. Shocked by Bukoi's shouts, the warriors blocked the front of Asura by holding up their weapons. Thanks to that, War Chief Asura could barely open his mouth. The demon god. Waita. Chunyoan reached out to them. Hook. The chiefs and commanders, who remembered the annihilation of the 2,000 Yada tribe warriors, gasped in fear. Hi. Chunyoan raised his palm and lowered it, flipping it over in the process. At that moment, intense vibrations rose from all directions, creating pressure, which made sure that both horses and humans couldn't stand up. What is this? My body. Weeing. The horse they had been holding on to suddenly had their ankles crushed and legs broken. Thanks to that, everyone who had been mounted on the horses fell to the ground. Thud. Whack. Quack. Seeing them all fall to the ground and groan in pain, Chunyoan nodded in satisfaction. Chunyoan, who wasn't on his horse, moved closer to them after bringing them down to his height. It was the way they saw him. He pulled them down from their horses, because he didn't want them looking down on him. Ugh. War Chief. Protect the War Chief. War Chief Asura fell from his horse, and the commanders who were around went to guard him. Their loyalty was so great that they were willing to protect their war chief, despite the frightened expression on their faces. I'm sure that he is the chief. Thanks to them, Chunyoan got to know who their chief was. The chief, Sorachu, who stood in the front of the Great Hun clan, raised both his hands as if he had no intention to fight and attempted to negotiate. The demon god. We wish to talk. Seeing him break out in cold sweat, Chunyoan's eyes went wide. Demon god? It was a new name he had been given after he became one of the 5 strongest warriors. If it was Jianghu, he would have reacted normally, but he never thought that the Great Plains would be so well informed about it. Chunyoan, who stopped for a moment, walked forward. Stop. Don't come close. I have nothing to say to you. Stay away. Chunyoan lightly waved his hand towards Sorachu. Swish. Woong. Ugh. It was just a light swing, but the body of that man moved away as if he was a piece of paper that got blown away by the wind. It wasn't just that. Every time Chunyoan waved his hand, those between him and the war chief would be blown away. Bong. Ack. Woong. What power? Ack. Bukoy, the martial arts user, was no exception. The commanders and escorts who were supposed to protect their war chief were thrown out of the way, and the war chief Asura faced Chen Yuan, the demon god, a young man with a pure white face, who was smaller than himself. However, the ferocious and subversive force radiating from his body made it impossible for Asura to treat the lord of the demonic cult recklessly. Facing him alone, Asura was at a loss for words on how to negotiate with the monster. At that moment, Chen Yuan opened his mouth first. "Are you the chief of the Great Hun clan?" "Why yes. Demon god." At the following question of Chen Yuan, War Chief Asura couldn't hide his embarrassment. "Who ordered this?" Shockingly, Chen Yuan was thinking that the demonic cult was being blocked by someone else's orders. How did he know that? Is this man really a god? Asura couldn't help but be shocked. In fact, it could be a pure coincidence. The Great Hun clan regularly dispatched people to Jianghu, so they knew about Chen Yuan. However, they thought that the name was given just because someone made it up and not because of his skills. Does he have a clue? It was a gamble, yet it seemed like it was right. The truth came out when Asura looked shocked, and his fear of Chen Yuan increased. We just wanted to scare you people back to your place. We never meant to fight. Give me the full details." At Chen Yuan's cold voice, War Chief Asura immediately revealed the identity of the person. After all, he had been deceived by him, so he had no intention of protecting that man's identity. Kong Soa, the second son of the great leader of Ulen and the forces of justice. Ulen? Seeing how Chen Yuan looked a little puzzled, War Chief Asura thought that everything went well. Now that he made a mistake, he decided to shift the blame onto Kong Soa. He thought that the wrath of Demon God would be directed to Kong Soa. "Kong Soa, we are in this situation because of you, you need to suffer. They came before you people arrived." Asura told the story of the delegation of the Ulen heading to the North Sea and the proposal Kong Soa had for them. The proposal to block the demonic cult's contingents for 3,000 sheep. Asura kept on stressing that he had no intention of battling and only wanted to intimidate them. "We don't have the power to stop the demon god. Kong Soa, if he hadn't lied about your presence, such a thing wouldn't have even happened." Grunt. Asura gritted his teeth. In fact, if it wasn't for Kong Soa, such humiliation wouldn't have happened. "We are angry too that such a situation cropped up because of him, that Kong Soa. Without him, 2,000 warriors' lives wouldn't have been lost in vain." Asura mentioned the 2,000 who died. He wanted to show that they didn't want to fight anymore and wanted to end the conflict. "We will make way for you right away. Please pass us. Aren't you people in a hurry?" Although it was humiliating for the Great Hun clan, their opponent wasn't human. They weren't in a situation to hold their ground anymore. Chen Yuan nodded at War Chief Asura, who seemed desperate. Ah! Joy filled Asura's face, who thought that negotiation went successful. Nice! Ha 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 ha! He was worried that Chen Yuan, the demon god, would end them, but fortunately, the misunderstanding was resolved, and thinking that Kong Soa will face the demon god's wrath, made him feel better. "Thank you. I am grateful that we met with the demon god of Clang." Huh. There was a sound of a mace falling to the ground. His favorite weapon had fallen. But it wasn't the only thing that fell. Wriggle. The nerves in the arm holding the mace moved as if they were alive. An arm fell to the ground. That arm belonged to Asura. It happened so quickly that Asura couldn't even feel any pain. At that moment, turning blue, he began to scream. Thud. Quiet. My arm. The pain of having his arm cut off was unbearable. War Chief. WY? The warriors of the Great Hun clan, who heard the conversation, were shocked. Everything seemed to be resolved, so why? Looking down at Asura, who was suffering, Chunyoan spoke in a cold voice. I'm trying to get things done in moderation, but did you think that I would let the one who attacked me first get away? Kwa, ku. That, Asura was speechless. Chunyoan grabbed Asura's hair. Grab. Ak. You would have attacked the contingent if I wasn't there. And you say it's all Kong Soa's fault? Asura's face went pale at the words which flowed out of Chunyoan's mouth. He was aware of his own mistakes. Gu. Asura was even more scared once Chunyoan began to exude energy. Don't do this. Ka. Kong Soa. We wouldn't have known of the demon god without him. Our clan wouldn't have even stopped yours. Well, you keep saying Kong Soa. Kong Soa, and that does seem true. Chunyoan spoke as if he wanted the entire Great Hun clan to listen, almost as if he too was puzzled. The reason for you to lose both of your arms is because of Ulen's Kong Soa. Remember that. Okay? 2 arms? The words 2 arms terrified Asura. He stepped back and staggered, trying to avoid it, but he couldn't. Thud. Looking at that, Chunyoan smiled and spoke to Asura, whose hair he was still holding. Let all your resentment go to Kong Soa. No, the demon god. Please. Slash. Before he could even finish, something passed through the left shoulders of the war chief Asura. Kwayok. A horrifying scream filled the silent night. A scream full of resentment. Creep. Commander Kong Soa, who was leading the unit to the north, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't even figure out the reason why. That was when he heard Jekyll Sohi's voice. Leader Moyong, did you hear something like a scream? Oddly, those words bothered him a lot.